Welcome back, guys. This is Dr. Gallenstein. Today we are doing our second lecture on demand functions, and specifically what we're going to look at is how does a change in income affect demand? Okay, so we're going to say income effects on demand. All right, so basically we said last time that demand functions are the functions that we derive from the consumer's utility maximization problem. So if we solve a utility maximization problem and we get and we solve for those optimal bundles, those functions, so demand function, be a function of price with parameters, the price of bagels and then income. Okay, and so these solutions to the utility maximization problem, these are the demand functions. These are semicolons here. They are functions of the price of the good, and they take the income and the price of the other good as parameters. Okay, so we said that these are demand functions. These are demand functions. Let's write out the whole functions. All right, and you'll notice that they are functions of the prices, that is their own price, right? And then they take as parameters income and the other goods price. Okay, so what we want to look at now is how does a change in income affect demand? And the way that we're going to do that is we're just going to plot it out using similar graphs that we used last time to see how it affects it. So we're just going to gain some insights on how income affects demand by looking at it graphically, just like we did in the last lecture. Okay, so we're going to do this very similar thing where we're going to have a graph that plots coffee and bagels, okay, and then right underneath it I'm going to have a graph that does the inverse demand curve for coffee. Okay, and what we're going to do is I will throw one budget line on here. Okay, so we'll call this line 1. All right, so budget line 1 corresponds to some given income level, corresponds to some income level equals price. Okay, here we go. All right, and so now let's throw let's throw an indifference curve on here. There we go. So indifference curve 1. Okay, and so here that is the optimal bundle. All right, now what we're going to do is we're going to increase income. So what happens when we increase income? Well, if we increase income, what we do is we shift the budget constraint out. The whole budget line shifts outwards because the income level goes up. Okay, so what we can do is we can just shift the whole budget line out. Let's see, that doesn't look great. It's going to be perfectly parallel. It shifts out parallel. There we go. It shifts out parallel to the original budget line. So here's budget line 2. 2 little dashes there. Okay, income equals, and then everything else stays the same. The prices stay the same, but income goes up. Okay, so we would say here that, I'll put it over here. Let's put it down here. Income is, here we go. And then let's add an indifference curve here. So if the budget line shifts out, that will mean that they can choose a bundle of coffee and bagels that lie on an indifference curve that is further from the origin, which means it'll be of higher utility. All right, so point B. And then let's say that income increases again. So we increase income again, and then we can again fall on a budget line that is further from the origin, so the budget line shifts out. Okay, and so it has a higher income. Let's see. Okay. Prices don't change, but income goes up. And so we're saying that this purple income, that's going to be the highest level of income. And so again, if income goes up, the budget line shifts out. They can afford bundles that have a higher quantity of bagels and coffee, and so they will get a bundle that's on a higher indifference curve. So we'll do it here. And so there we go. So we've got 3 different bundles that they can buy now, given their incomes have increased. So given that their incomes have increased from the light blue eye to the dark blue eye to the purple eye, as their incomes go up, their budget line shifts outwards, which allows them to buy bundles on higher indifference curves. And so their demand basically will increase. Now let's show what that looks like. We're going to do the same idea here, where we are going to trace these lines onto a line that has demand. And you know what? I'm going to move this a little bit to just give myself a little bit more space here. Okay. All right, and so then let's plot this out. All right, and then this one. And so now the question is, what happens to the demand curves, so green, what happens to the demand curve as the income goes up? So let's draw one demand curve. So here, this is for the first income level. So this is for this blue income level. Here is the demand curve. Let's do it this way. This will be the demand curve for the light blue income. Okay, and so then this will be the demand level. Here's the demand. Here's the demand curve. And this point here will be the quantity demanded and the price at which it's demanded. So now the question is, what happens when income increases? What happens when income increases? What happens? Do I shift down here? So one might initially think that my demand will increase to this, but that's not what happens. Because when income goes up, the price, whoops, I accidentally deleted my demand curve. Let's put that back on here. What happens when I increase income is that nothing changes with the price. The price does not change. The price stays the same. The quantity demanded goes up. If we disentangle this, we can say, well, A equals some bundle B star and C star, and then bundle B will also equal some bundle of B star and C star, and bundle B is going to include more B and more C, so more bagel and more coffee. So demand for coffee is going to go up as income goes up in this illustration. Okay. And so demand for coffee goes up, but the price doesn't change. And so it doesn't shift along the demand curve. What happens is that the demand curve shifts outward. And so so it's actually the same curvature. We have the same curvature. But when income goes up, what happens is that the demand curve shifts to the right. And so I'll illustrate that here with the line. The demand curve shifts to the right as income goes up. And so the new bundle will be this bundle. This quantity demanded. This is the quantity of coffee that they will demand when income increases from the light blue income to the dark blue income. All right, so income goes up, and which means that consumption of coffee will increase. The price stays the same, but the consumption goes up because the demand curve shifts to the right. And we can look at the same thing now for C. When income goes from the dark blue up to the purple, the demand curve remains the same shape, and it just shifts outwards. And we will now demand this quantity. And so demand increases by the demand curve shifting to the right as income goes up. Okay, so that's typically how increases in income will affect demand. But now it actually becomes, it's a little bit more nuanced. And to demonstrate the nuance, let me introduce the concept. I'm going to introduce the concept of elasticity. All right, so I'm going to introduce the concept of elasticity to give us a more rigorous way of understanding how an increase in income will affect demand. So let's look at elasticity. Okay, elasticity. I'll represent that with this kind of squiggly little letter E here. Elasticity is, I'll just give it a generic definition first, a percentage change in Y given a percentage change in X. So it's a percentage change in some variable Y given a percentage change in some variable X. So let me write that. And I usually will represent that by giving a superscript and a subscript to my epsilon. Okay, so write this mathematically. This would be, so a percentage change in Y given a percentage change in X. We could write it differently. We could say this, a change in Y divided by Y, so that's a percentage change in Y, over a change in X given a percentage change in X. We can articulate this again differently. This would be the derivative of Y with respect to X times X over Y. This would be the elasticity. So I'd say we would articulate this as the X elasticity of Y. The X elasticity of Y. So what we're going to look at right now is we're going to look at we want to start with the income elasticity of demand. So the income elasticity of demand, that will tell me what is the percentage change in, what is a percentage change in demand for a good given a percentage change in income. Okay, so what is the percentage change in the quantity demanded of a good given the percentage change in income? So if we say a 1% change, to what extent does demand for a good change given a 1% change in income? So a 1 unit, we could say, a 1% change in income, how much does demand for a good change given that 1 unit increase in income? So if there's 1%, so a 1% change in income, how much in percentage terms does that change demand for that good? That's what we want to look at. We'll look at the income elasticity of demand. So let's just let's do that. We're going to look at the income elasticity of demand. So it's the income elasticity of demand. That's going to be equal to the so the percentage change in income given a, percentage change in demand for coffee, let's say, given a percentage change in income. Now, if I want to calculate that rigorously, it would be the derivative of demand with respect to income times income divided by the demand function. All right, so if I want to calculate that rigorously, that would be, and so what this is it is a measure of the percentage change in demand given, we can say, a 1% change in income. All right, so this is a more formal way of expressing how does a change in income affect demand. And so what we'll see here is that there are 4 different classifications of income elasticity of demand that will be important for us to know. There are 2 broad categories. One is there's something called a normal good, and then there's something called an inferior good. And then in the classification of normal good, we will find that there are 2 subcategories, what we call a luxury good and a necessity good. Okay. So a normal good is a good that, well, behaves normally. It's kind of what we would expect. A normal good is a good where the income elasticity of demand is greater than or equal to 0. And by that means it's positive. That means that as income goes up, demand for the good goes up. That's a normal good. A normal good is where if I have more money, I will demand more of that good. That is in contrast to an inferior good, where the income elasticity of demand is negative. That would be where, as my income goes up, I actually demand less of the good. So we call that an inferior good. The typical example for college students is always that an inferior good is ramen noodles, like the cheap ramen noodles that you would get at the grocery store. Ramen noodles are very inexpensive, and so they're a nice food for college students. But they're an inferior good. As soon as your incomes go up, you'll never consume ramen noodles again. And so they are an inferior good. As income goes up, demand for ramen noodles goes down. So that would be an example of an inferior good. So we just ramen noodles. The textbook example. Normal good would be like a steak dinner or something luxurious like that, where your demand for that will go up as your income goes up. Or maybe cars or other kind of, or really just most goods, your demand for it will go up as income goes up. But here are some kind of classic examples where you might compare steaks and ramen, where ramen is clearly as your income goes up, you'll eat less ramen, and as your income goes up, you'll eat more steak. Okay. And now normal goods can be broken down into 2 categories, luxury good and necessity good. Now, a luxury good is where as your income goes up, you will demand more of it, but you demand a more than 1% increase given a 1% increase in income. So if your income goes up by 1%, your demand for a luxury good will go up by more than 1%. The way that we would express that is to say that your income elasticity of demand is greater than 1. So that would be that a 1% increase in your income would result in a greater than 1% increase in demand for a luxury good. And this would be in contrast to a necessity good. Necessity good would be a good where it is still positive, right? So the income elasticity of demand is positive, greater than 0. But it's less than or equal to 1. That means that a 1% increase in income will result in a less than 1% increase in demand for that good. So the typical example of necessity good would be things like food, that as your income goes up, you'll probably eat more food and you might eat nicer food, but you're not going to spend all of your additional money on food. In fact, you're only going to spend kind of a smaller proportion of that increase in your income on food, and you're going to start to do other things. So as your income goes up, you're going to start to do things that you wouldn't allow yourself to do before. Like, let's say, going to the movies. When your income goes up, you're going to spend a little bit of that additional income on food, but you're going to spend a lot more on maybe going to the movies or going on a vacation. So these might be examples of luxury goods. But a necessity good is a good like food. It's something that you're always going to spend some money on. And so when your income goes up, you'll spend a little bit more, but you're not going to spend a lot more. Okay, so these are the different types of goods. So if we want to understand how does an increase in income affect demand, well, we have to think about the elasticity, and we have to think about the different kinds of goods. So for a normal good, an increase in income will increase demand. For an inferior good, an increase in income will decrease demand. Now, if we want, let's get an idea of what this might look like by taking a look at a graph that has a budget line and some indifference curves. So let's draw a graph to try to illustrate this concept of normal good versus inferior good. All right, so kind of classic graph that we're well familiar with at this point. We have coffee here, bagels here. All right, and then we're going to have one budget line to start with. All right, so one budget line here. And we will draw an indifference curve. Okay. The indifference curve implies that they're going to choose bundle A here. Okay. Now what we want to do is I'm gonna put some grid lines on this. I'll explain this in a minute. Okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to say income goes up. So if income goes up, the budget line is going to shift outwards. So I have a second budget line. And now I'm going to illustrate the types of goods using this graph. Okay, so let's see, what should I do? I'm going to use brown here. So if both bagels and coffee are both normal goods, that means as income goes up, I will demand more of coffee and bagels. Then my preferences would be reflected in a indifference curve that would intersect the budget line somewhere between these two dashed lines. I think I can make this more clear. So let me try to illustrate. So here, this will be bundle B. At bundle B, you can see, just by looking at the graph, you can see, so bundle B is composed of some bundle B star and C star, and bundle A is composed of some bundle, of some combination of some smaller B star and C star. And what you'll be able to see is that B star, C star are both less than this darker bundles, C star. So we can look at that. So the bundle for C star, let's use our colors here. So here's C star for the light blue. Here is B star for the light blue. When it shifts out, when people's preferences are such that both goods are normal goods, then demand will look something like this. Well, here is the dark blue C star. Here is the dark blue B star. So you can see that at bundle B, both consumption of coffee goes up and consumption of bagels goes up. That means that as income increases, demand for both increases. So this would imply that coffee and bagels are both normal goods. They're both normal goods. Okay. Well, now, what would it look like if we had one is a normal good and one is an inferior good? Well, let's take a look at that. What if your preferences were like this, where as income moves out, your preferences were reflected in this indifference curve, and this indifference curve intersected at a different point. So we will call this point C. At point C, So point C has a bundle, B star and C star. You'll notice that B star is way up here, which is much larger. I'm going to put this off to the side here. B star here. All right. B star is much larger for bagels. They demand a lot more bagels. But C star is back here. So they demand fewer cups of coffee. So if their preferences are like this, then we would see that bagels are a normal good and coffee is an inferior good. And we can draw it in the other quadrant to reinforce the point. Let's say that your preferences were down here. Your preferences were such that your indifference curve intersected or was tangent to the budget line at this point, point D. At point D, your demand for bagel, you have bagel star, coffee star. Your C star is way out here, which is much bigger than the original. But your bagels demand is out here, so which is much smaller. And so what we find is that coffee is a normal good, but bagels is an inferior good. So bagels is inferior. That means its income goes up, demand goes down. As coffee, as income goes, so coffee is a normal good, so as income goes up, demand for coffee goes up. So that is a, that is a normal good. Okay, so there we go with that. In the next lecture, we're going to look at price effects on demand, which we will find to be quite nuanced, complicated, but very interesting.